When an NSA contractor named Edward Snowden chose to leak documents related to government surveillance, he entrusted them to filmmaker Laura Poitras. The documentary she made following that historic encounter, called Citizen 4, earned Poitras an Oscar, and it's just one in a series of acclaimed films in which Poitras fixes her lens on pivotal figures putting themselves in the crosshairs of power. And she's done it again in a new film called Cover Up, about the legendary investigative journalist Seymour Hersh.
Sei's reporting was the trigger that set up the ugliest portrayal of a government agency.
Vietnam, Kissinger, Watergate, foreign assassinations, Abu Ghraib. It just got worse, worse, worse.
Sey Hersh's work uncovering abuse of power, along with being someone people just like talking to, give him a few things in common with the director and producer of Cover Up, Laura Poitras, who joins me now in studio. It is an absolute honor to have you here, Laura. Great to see you again, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
It's amazing work, and as always, you've done this work where it's about so much thematically. It's U.S. history, it's about journalism and the process, but it's also about this guy, Sey Hersh, who I say with affection and reverence, what a character.
Yeah, he's a great character. I mean, with all of my films, I make portraits of individuals, but their lens is to look at the larger society and critiques of society. And Sey was, you know, the perfect person to make a film about. I mean, he's legendary. Yeah. His body of work is extraordinary, and it allows me to make a film about this country.
You know, you mentioned some of your other subjects. Let's talk about them briefly. In 2014, Citizen 4 with Edward Snowden, Julian Assange in 2016, the artist and activist Nan Goldin in 22 with All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, and now Sey Hersh. It's fair to detect something of a pattern in this subject.
There's a pattern of troublemakers, people who are, like, you know, causing, calling abuse of power out when they see it, and using information to do that, you know. I mean, Julian Assange exposed, you know, lifted the veil of U.S. foreign policy. Nan Goldin exposed the Sackler family and their role in the overdose crisis.
Yeah.
So these are people who are, like, driven, and they're risk takers, troublemakers, but they use knowledge and information to tell the truth.
And no, we see that play out in this film so beautifully. You're such a master of structure, and any good documentary is about structure. But there's also these foundational challenges with certain films. With this one, I see two, I mean, just grappling with this monumental body of work. But also, as we learned in the film, the 20 years it took just to get Sey to say yes to do it.
Yeah.
And why so long? Why did it take so long?
It took a little bit of patience on my part to make this film. I first asked him to participate in a film in 2005. I just made a film about the war in Iraq, and I was feeling a lot of despair about the state of investigative journalism in the country at that time, which I still feel a lot of despair.
Feeling better now.
No, it's still, the despair is still, you know, very much with me. And, you know, he was very gracious. He met with me, and then he ultimately said, you know, he couldn't be part of a film because of his need for source protection. He also felt that he's not the story, right? He wants his work, you know, get out of the way of the story is a line that he tells in the film. So he believes that, but I was patient and persistent, and he finally
You absolutely were, and it was a lot of work also just to wrap your mind and the film in our minds around this body of work that he's given us. I mean, there's so many different ways to talk about it. He blew the cover on My Lai, these U.S. soldier abuses of citizens in Vietnam. There's Abu Ghraib in Iraq with prisoners, and many other CIA surveillance. We see echoes, not just within his own work, decade over decade, of these recurring patterns, but even in your own work. I talk about CIA surveillance, and then we talk about surveillance with Edward Snowden. I mean, just talk about these recurring patterns and how you
Totally. I mean, the film is about cycles of abuse of power, cycles of lies, cover-ups, and impunity, and the role of investigative journalism to sort of stop these cycles. So, and Sey's body of work, it's monumental. I mean, he exposed the massacre of civilians in My Lai, where the U.S. military killed over 500 civilians in cold blood, and then also the torture in Abu Ghraib during the Iraq War. So I was interested in the film to draw connections across time, to talk about the relationship if we look at Vietnam and Iraq, and then also Gaza, because Sey is currently reporting about what's happening there.
He's currently reporting, and it's the reporting and the stories, and as I say, a history of the United States in so many ways, but then also for journalists and people who are interested in journalism, there's so much there as well. You take it upon yourself to show the process, Sey's process, and as we say, investigative journalism, we're bemoaning the fact that it's going away. This is an opportunity for people to reconnect with someone who's a master of this craft doing it. Talk a bit about the ways that you did that, including the sort of primary evidence of these 7,000 some odd assets and legal pads that become part of
Yeah,
this?
it was an amazing group of filmmakers and collaborators who made this film. As every film is a collaboration, but this one required an amazing amount of research, and so we had over 6,000 different archival assets of footage of documents, declassified documents, and then we had access to Sai's reporter's notebooks, which he's, as you see in the film, a little protective of.
A little bit.
A little bit. You know, to cross, because we were also presenting an evidentiary case about,
right.
you know, using the material to make a case in the film, but then also, as you say, like talk about the process of investigative journalism to slow down the time so that the audience is understanding how a story unfolds as Sai is hearing about it. So the My Lai story, you know, it's just like a tip, it's just a hunch, and he thinks, he believes there's something there, and then slowly the magnitude of the story comes out.
The tip and the hunch that you're talking about for Sai also just comes on his ability as an investigative journalist to cultivate sources. We hear from him talking about being in the Pentagon, using sports talk to sort of chat people up, and suddenly they start to say things about what's happening over there, dropping names. This process of cultivating sources is an amazing thing, and maybe a lost art for people here in this moment of investigative journalism.
Yeah, Sai was a master at you know, building trust and sources that, you know, came back to him, and people who were, you know, very critical, people in the government who were critical of what the government was doing. He just has a long history. We talk in the film about Bob Kiley, who was the source for a lot of his amazing scoops when he was at the New York Times, including Operation Chaos, where the CIA was spying on protesters, student movement, anti-war protesters against the Vietnam War, and that, you know, this is just, you know, protecting your sources, trust, and they, you know, and he also has, you know, a bit of magic in how he relates to people.
It's true, and you do too, I'd say, and I want to talk to you a bit about the way that you also relate to your sources in a moment, but he's protective of his sources to the point that he almost quits, and we see it in the middle of the film. And folks don't see this we could talk about the film so much, we'll never give it away because there's so much just you have to see, but we don't see what you said to bring him back to the table.
Right.
What was it?
I mean, he believed in the film, like he was really committed to doing it, and so, and I think he knew that we were interested. I mean, first of all, we weren't going to, you know, jeopardize any of his sources, and he knew that. You know, even though he's sensitive, he knew that we weren't.
But it gets touchy.
My background speaks for itself. So
it does.
It was. But, you know, I think he cooled down. You know, he's known for having a bit of a hot temper. So I think once he cooled down, he was back and very committed.
Well, I know that he has been functionally proud of what this film represents of his work, but also you take a critical eye to some of his practices, and he has taken some heat, and there's been some controversy around some of his anonymously sourced pieces, his single-sourced pieces.
The single sourcing, I mean, the single sourcing is something that, you know, had to be asked. I mean, I think that's, you know, it's something that I'm critical of and his reporting around Syria and Assad, and, you know, where he just acknowledges that he got too close to power there, and that he's not perfect. And, you know, journalism is, you know, it's a tough thing to do, and you're trying to find the truth when people are lying to you, particularly national security journalists. And so, and we had to ask about those more controversial
No,
stories.
absolutely, and you do it well in the film. With Syria and Assad, of course, there was all this conversation about whether it was Assad or rebels in Syria that were committing some of these attacks of chemical warfare, and ultimately, history has shown it to be one thing, and maybe Seymour was thinking it was something different, and it's part of what we're talking about with this single source issue. And it does make me think about you with your sources, but please continue.
I mean, I just think we have to understand how hard it is that this kind of investigative journalism, because you're dealing with secrets, and you're dealing with people who lie to you. So, you know, as much as I needed to press Sai on these questions, I think we also need to look at the sort of larger, you know, what the government is doing in terms of lying to the public and lying to the press. And so it's always my focus to shift, like, yes, the individual matters, but let's look at the structure.
Yeah, and part of this is reporting and verifying your sources, but also having good instinct. I mean, I think back to obviously a very famous email that you received, an encrypted email from Edward Snowden, and on some level, you can't really verify that before you start pulling on the thread. So you have to trust your instinct a little bit, reconcile that for us.
I mean, that was quite, you know, it was a moment in my life that probably changed the course of my life. I got this email. The
course of history.
It sounded, you know, my gut instinct was legit, but then I had to go through the options. One is somebody trying to, I was worried that it might be an FBI entrapment. You know, the FBI does that. Could be a crazy person, you know, could be a waste of time, not a good thing. Or this person could be legit. and their life is on the line, and so is mine. And I have to be vigilant in terms of how I go forward. And you just have to walk with all those possibilities.
Along with all these aspects of journalism, the process, and political history, it's also just a personal portrait. You understand the motivations for this person. And for all of us, the reasons we do things, they're circumstantial. Sometimes there's something more essential and ineffable as well. What did you learn about motivation in tracking down Sy in this way?
Yeah, I mean, we do spend some time talking about where Sy comes from to understand what his motivation is. And so he's, born in Chicago, son of immigrants who fled Eastern Europe before the Second World War, and there was a lot of silence in the family. And I think he, once he discovered, his sort of that the journalism would be a way to sort of break that kind of silence and find truth. He was just hooked. But his upbringing in Chicago, I think, informs everything. And he saw a lot of discrimination as he grew up.
Well, exposing abuse of power, being someone people like talking to. I feel like I could be talking about you. How much of yourself do you see reflected back in Sy, and how much does it make you think about your own motivation, your own tactics and practices for doing the work?
In a way that I don't ask myself those questions in the way that I don't think Sy asked himself, but I do think Sy and I share some traits. I mean, I do think we're allergic to kind of abuse of power, and we approach the work maybe a bit more from an outsider perspective. I mean, Sy was freelance when he broke the My Lai story, and then he was worked for the New York Times and the New Yorker. So he's been somebody who's kind of emerged from kind of more of a outsider perspective, and and as a documentary filmmaker who has done reporting on the nation state and national security reporting, I also have a bit of an outsider perspective, which I think is, I mean, I know it's the reason why Snowden reached out to me, because he was worried that if he went straight to one of the legacy news organization, that the story could be suppressed. And that's, that would be a nightmare, because he would have taken all this risk.
Yeah. Part of what you're sketching out then is the value of an independent press, not one that is corporate owned. And there is a conversation about corporate media inside your film as well, which we'll let the viewers watch that. But thinking about these repeated cycles, what is the way out? Is it investigative journalism? Is it independent journalism?
Right. I mean, I think all of it, yes. And I do think journalists are continuing to do incredible reporting. I mean, what worries me now are the institutions, and are the institutions going to back journalists? And I think we've had some very dangerous precedents in these recent settlements between CBS around the 60 Minutes and Paramount, and settling and not fighting for the First Amendment, and also ABC. And I think we need the institutions that hire and support journalists to back the First Amendment, and to use all of their muscle to defend the First Amendment.
Well, your film and your films show us that these moments don't occur in a vacuum, that they repeat, and you've given us some of the breadcrumb trail for the way out. It's never that tidy, but you put a lens on all of it. Laura Poitras, so honored to have you. Congratulations on the film. So great to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to see you.
Incredible to have you here. Laura Poitras talking a bit about this film that you can find. It is called Cover Up. It will be in select theaters in the Los Angeles area this weekend. The film also released for streaming on Netflix December 26th.
Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. For more stories in your communities, click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV for the latest information, balanced coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.